Madrid is a connected city. A city filled with organizations that care or believe they do. And yet, sex trafficking remains almost invisible. Not because it's rare, but because its mechanisms are designed to stay unseen. To understand this contradiction, we looked at sex trafficking through the lens of SDG 17, Partnerships for the Goals. Not as a bureaucratic framework, but as a way of understanding why so many actors coexist around this issue, without ever truly confronting its core. In Spain, prostitution is neither legal nor illegal. It exists in a gray zone where language, institutions, and moral ambiguity soften the reality behind it. Work, client, service, choice. Words that sound harmless, but words that build a fake normality around exploitation. Behind these words, there are women whose journeys follow a tragically predictable line. Origin to migration, to promise to recruitment, to exploitation to survival. And around them, an entire constellation of actors. Police, courts, NGOs, churches, society, all aiming to touch the problem, but none truly reaching its root. Because the root is not operational. It is psychological and perpetual. What keeps this system alive is not only violence. It is dissociation. Survivors describe trafficking not only as violence, but as a world where your own thoughts slowly stop belonging to you. Pain becomes routine, fear becomes discipline, language becomes a shield that hides the truth even from yourself. This is why data is incoherent. This is why institutions fail to coordinate. This is why society barely sees the issue. The system doesn't just control bodies, it controls perception. At this point, the role of SDG 17 becomes clear. The problem is not the absence of partnerships. It is that the partnerships we have are built on false assumptions about the reality inside the system. A reality that not even the slaves of the system can yet see. But this led us to a critical problem. How do you understand a reality you cannot access? How do you research an experience that is invisible, unreachable, and emotionally unsafe to approach? From this limitation, we took a strategic turn. We looked for other contexts where people live inside fake realities, where manipulation, fear, and dependency reshape what feels normal. This is why we studied toxic relationships. Not to compare experiences, but to understand the mechanisms of distorted perception. Through this parallel route, we gained access to something we could have never accessed inside the trafficking system. The anatomy of illusion. The way denial protects survival. The way awareness breaks through. And from survivors, both of trafficking and of these other closed systems, one insight became our anchor. Awareness cannot be imposed. External warnings rarely matter. Facts, campaigns, rescue missions, they all hit a wall if the person's perception is still held hostage. Real change begins in a precise, fragile instant. The moment someone sees themselves from the outside. A moment of rupture. A moment of truth. This became the foundation of our design proposal. If the system survives through fake realities, then the intervention must target the moment when reality cracks. The challenge then becomes to design a trigger. An emotional mechanism capable of initiating that moment of self-recognition. But this trigger must be safe, accessible, light enough to move through different actors without bureaucratic complexities, and powerful enough to affect both the general public and the women still inside the system. So, we created a proposal on reflection, not metaphorically, but literally. A methodology where the tools themselves carry the emotional structure needed to provoke rupture. And we translated this conceptual mechanism into physical anchor. A trigger that travels freely, is shared across actors, and provoke emotion without exposing anyone to harm. A mirror that speaks through a story. Now, how do you feel? Have you felt targeted, uncomfortable, touched, or neutral? Nothing at all? We tested different ways of representing that reflection and introspection through many iterations of films, and we concluded that the most effective one was the one of a mirror, with closeness and reflection. All responses are valid at this point, because what you just saw is not a narrative, it is a mechanism. If this film has gotten to you in some way, this means it has been effective. But either way, we are strategic designers, not filmmakers. So what we are proposing is not this final film. It is the system around it, the why, the how, and to who. Because this does not stop here. It is the first step of a system that grows from reflection. Once perception cracks, further initiatives become possible. Straightforward ones, such as the further development of this mechanism, creating campaigns with messages and visuals that operate both as communication and as emotional triggers. And wider ones, announcing screenings, talks, discussions, wider projects that, through their implementation, serve the initial and primary purpose of our proposal. A person sees the poster, and recognition begins. Therefore, our implementation model starts with the trigger that leads to reflection, that opens a space for conversation, and creates the context for emergent initiatives. Instead of forcing partnerships, we create the conditions that allow them to form naturally, from survivors, communities, cultural spaces, and organizations who recognize themselves in this rupture. A system that expands not through bureaucracy, but through resonance. This is a kind of new partnership. Not an agreement, not an institution, not a legal framework. A partnership built through shared recognition between survivors and women still inside, between audiences and uncomfortable truths, between society and the violence it has normalized through silence. A partnership formed not through structure, but through reflection. Our proposal does not claim to rescue anyone. Rescue cannot come from us. It cannot come from institutions alone. What we design is a moment, small, intimate, powerful, capable of waking perception, and opening the door to everything that can follow. A mirror, a fragment of a face, a word that names what has been hidden. Because in a system built on silence and denial, sometimes the most radical partnership you can design is the one between a person and their own truth.